Hi, I'm Dr. Karl Kapp, and today I want to talk about designing an escape room for learning. We're going to start by defining what escape rooms are and then go into the step-by-step process I use to create a digital or even a physical escape room with learning outcomes. So, how do we define an escape room? What do we mean by escape room? Well, I don't want you to think of an escape room as a physical room that you have to escape from. I mean, that's one type of escape room. But really, think of it as a series of puzzles, problems, or challenges that are delivered, virtually or in a book or even in a card game that result in a desired outcome. And in this case, our case, a learning outcome. So, why are escape rooms effective for learning? Well, they do a number of things. One is a quick, intense experience that fits into most organizations' training timeframes because those timeframes are becoming shorter and shorter. It's a safe environment to experiment, fail, and then try again. And we know that learners learn from their own failures. So, setting them up for a safe failure is a good way to bring about a learning outcome. And they can simulate real world pressure in a controlled environment. The pressure to meet deadlines, the pressure to finish things on time, the pressure of working with others, all of that can be very helpful. And of course, an escape room can foster teamwork, help with communication, as well as creating social connections and helping to build culture within an organization, even with a virtual escape room. And finally, they encourage observation, adaptation, and most importantly, non-linear thinking. These are all highly desirable benefits from creating a learning-focused escape room. So, one of the things that people ask me all the time is how do you get started creating a learning escape room? So, the way I do it is I start by filling out a spreadsheet. Yep, I said it, a spreadsheet. And the spreadsheet can be really helpful for creating and outlining and designing your escape room. So, let's look at a spreadsheet and see how I use it and see if it can work for you. Here it is. Here's the spreadsheet. And by filling out the spreadsheet, it's going to really help you create your escape room. So a lot of people want to just jump into a theme, and you can certainly do that. You can have a theme in mind. For example, you might have a theme of escaping from an office or escaping from a museum or something like that. But what we first need to do is think about number one, what is the learning objective? So you'll have a terminal learning objective, that's the final goal, like improve sales, but you also have these enabling objectives that lead to the terminal objective. So you want to clearly state what the learner is able to do. You, of course, want to use actionable, measurable verbs. The next thing is a description. This is the rationale for this learning objective. This learning objective is important because learners need to do this, and you try to describe that. Then you would want to think about what puzzle you're going to use. And we'll talk about puzzles here in a little bit. But you describe the challenge, puzzle, task, how it would appear in a digital escape room or a physical escape room. So a little bit of the puzzle and description. Next, you want solution. Like, what is the answer to this puzzle or description? It's very important when you're troubleshooting to know the answer quickly and effectively. And then you want to align it to learning. So how does that, differ from the learning objective? Well, what this is says, okay, if we're going to be teaching somebody about spreadsheets and we are encouraging them to sum up some numbers because we want them to learn formulas, that's an alignment of the learning goal with the objective. So you just make sure that what the learners are doing actually has an outcome that can be linked back to the learning objective. Sometimes the outcomes are a little loose, but we want to make them as tight as possible. Next, indicate any digital assets that you might need, right? You might need files, you might need tools, or physical assets if it's a physical escape room. Then you want a time estimate for the puzzle. If you only have an hour and all of your puzzles are 30 minutes and you have 10 puzzles, that's not going to work, right? So, and 30 minutes is too long. You kind of want a 5 to 6 minute puzzle, maybe some 2 or 3 minute puzzles. Some things quick, some things a little bit longer, maybe 10 minutes max. And then finally, the difficulty level. Because when we create an escape room, we want to have different levels of difficulty for all of our puzzles. If we don't have those different levels, people can get frustrated because it's too hard, like all the puzzles are hard, or all the puzzles are too easy. So that's what you want to keep in mind. Okay, now that we know all the pieces in that spreadsheet that I use to create an escape room, let's see some examples in the spreadsheet already filled out and how it actually works in practice. Okay, now here we have the spreadsheet with a row filled out as an example. And in this case, it's cybersecurity. So the learning objective is that learners must recognize threats as part of cybersecurity training. And in this case, the description here is going to be a threat will be in an email, as many threats, are generated through email. So that's the description. And then the puzzle basically says players have to examine 4 email screenshots and identify the one that contains 3 common phishing errors. The solution is email number 3 has a mismatched URL, poor grammar, suspicious attachment, all the things usually in phishing emails. And it's aligned with the learning because it reinforces the ability of learners to critically analyze digital communications under time pressure. Then, of course, we have what digital assets are needed, in this case, 4 fake email images. We think it'll take about 5 minutes and it's medium difficulty. So this is how you would complete the row in the spreadsheet. Okay, now let's look at another example so that we can see multiple examples and gain insights for how you'd want to fill out your own escape room for learning worksheet. Okay, so here's the other example. This one is in finance, basic finance, so nothing real critical, but this is learning formulas in Excel. So basically what we're going to do for the learning objective is use basic Excel formulas to perform calculations. So that makes sense. The description here is that learners will apply spreadsheet skills to reinforce digital fluency and workforce solving problems, within spreadsheets. So that's that element. And then the puzzle is going to be that the players are presented with an Excel table showing monthly expenses, but they have to enter a sum formula to calculate the total and unlock the next clue. And then here's the sum formula that they need to have in there. So that's the answer to this escape room problem. And then they're going to have to align the learning. And the learning, basically, we as designers have to align the learning, is promotes familiarity with Excel functionality, Excel formulas. So we're trying to give the learner familiarity with these formulas, having them actually solve for a formula that fits perfectly. Then what digital assets are we going to need? Well, of course, we're going to need a spreadsheet. We're going to need some cells. We might want a clue to let them know that they have to sum it, maybe some instructions as an overlay. So we just decide what kind of elements we want there. And then finally, we have the time estimate. We think maybe 6 minutes. And then the level of difficulty. It's summing in Excel. So it's a fairly easy puzzle to solve and one of the easier ones that we'll put in, and they will get progressively difficult going to pivot tables and all kinds of things as we build out the entire escape room. So if you fill out that learning escape room worksheet as I outlined, you're going to be a long way toward creating an effective e-learning or face-to-face or board game or card game escape room. You're going to have all the elements you need there. You're going to be thinking through the process. But a question I get often is like, what about the puzzles? What kind of puzzles should I have in there? What are some elements of puzzles that make sense? So let's go over some puzzle types that you can put in your e-learning or physical escape room for learning. So one type of puzzle is called a Polybius square. And a Polybius square is a 5 by 5 grid. A Polybius square is a 5 by 5 grid used to represent letters of the alphabet with numbers. It's a method of encryption where each letter is replaced by a corresponding row and column number in a grid. And so basically it transforms the message into a numerical code. So the learner or the person trying to figure it out will find like a 1 1 and know that's A. They'll find a 1 2 and know that's B. So that's how they would figure out the square and the code that you might want to use. A Caesar cipher is one where each letter of the alphabet is shifted down a certain number of letters in the alphabet. So here, for example, if we look at the letter, let's go ahead and look at the letter B, it's actually Y. So it's actually from the end of the alphabet. So it's shifted about 3 over. So we can see D, if we wanted D, the cipher would give us A. So if we had the elements of figuring out the cipher or knew how many letters shifted, we could then use that for the code, and this can be very helpful. So here's an example of the Caesar cipher in action. You can see here that I actually equals L, right? So if I look down here, there's I, it equals L. Then I look B. B is actually, I have to look down here, B is E. And then I need to find X. And I look at X, and X is A. And that's how I find out what the code is. So that's a really good way to plant a code into your digital or even physical escape room. Now, there are lots of different types of codes to use, right? We use the square, we use the Caesar cipher. Here are more common ones. International Morse code is used often, Braille is used often. Any kind of code that you can find and have is helpful as a clue for your escape room. And mixing it up is really helpful as well. You might have one Morse code clue, you might have one Caesar cipher clue, mix them up to allow the learners to have some variety in the types of clues. You want variety in clues, otherwise it gets pretty boring. Another thing you can do is use locks or combinations. And there's lots of different kinds of locks. There's directional locks that we have over here. We've got locks just with pure numbers. We've all experienced that. We have the rotating lock. That's way back from my high school locker. We've got keypads. We've got locks with letters. We could do the letters. We've got other locks with words and letters and numbers, I mean. So you've got lots of different combinations of the locks and combinations that you could do. You could do this for a safe. You could do this for a keypad, pin pad, all kinds of number letter combinations. And these are always good to have in your escape room. Now, we could go over all different kinds of puzzles all day practically, but let's just sequence this up or shorten this up a little bit so that we can see different puzzles. So, you have logic and deduction puzzles. That might be Sudoku type puzzle, a grid-based challenge. That's the puzzle that we used for the Polybus square. We've got ciphers and codes, the Caesar cipher, if you remember that. We've got Morse code, binary codes. We have words and language. You could use anagrams or riddles, the famous, I am Lord Voldemort, the Tom Marvolo riddle. We've got math and number problems that we can do, addition, subtraction, multiplication, hidden objects. You can find items. You can lose locks and combinations, as we've discussed. Assembly or physical, maybe jigsaw puzzles. And you could do that even with drag and drop if you are doing that in your escape room. And then you can have audio and visual cues. You could listen to something. You could have QR triggered clues. I always like using QR codes, and even time and sequence, right? You have to do something in a certain order. You can even use colors as a clue. Here's 3 different colors. You've got to put those colors in a certain order. The Simon Says type of escape room elements is frequently used. This color flashes, then this color flashes twice. Those kinds of things. So these are types of puzzles that you can use in your learning escape room. Okay, so that's a little bit of information about how to design your learning escape room. Let's look at a couple of different escape rooms, one done in Google with Google Forms and one done with Articulate Storyline, so we can see how escape rooms might work, in nature or out in the wild, so to speak. So we take these ideas and we put them into practice in digital escape rooms. Let's check them out. Okay, so here we are in a Google-based escape room. So if we just click on slideshow, it's going to bring up our image, and our image is going to have a number of clickable items. So let's go ahead and click here. We can see that this is going to bring up a Google form, and this Google form, look, that has some code in it. Remember how we talked about codes? So this is a Braille code that we can use to figure out part of establishing a team. So that's some important information there. We also can look at other codes. So here we have a box marked 702W30. We click on that and it's a safe. And what happens to be the code? Well, it's that code that we just saw, right? So we can say, oh, that code is 702W30. So we'll enter the code 702W30 and see what that does. And there we go. We have some information. So this is a way that you can incorporate some of what we've talked about into our images. So we click here, we actually have a picture of a storm. And so we have to say, well, what's happening in the storm? I happen to know that it's storming, right? Storming. And that is one of the elements of a team, right? This is the second stage of establishing a team. So this escape room is about teamwork and helping people think about teamwork. Now here's an escape room created in Articulate Storyline, which is the same concept. It's teaching teamwork and also uses the same paradigm as a professor's office. So it says, what is this? And it looks like a journal. And one of the interesting things about this is we can add a journal, and you cannot escape this room until you complete all the elements of the journal. So that becomes important. It says, watch out for mice. Let's click on the mouse and see if that can't help us. There's the mouse. What does that say? Always remember capital letters are key. So that's telling us we have to type in capital letters. That does seem like a step forward. Now let's check out the room. And there's the camera. Remember before we had the picture of the storm. So I know that this is storming. And so if we type in storming here, we can go ahead and hit next. And it's telling us storming is the second stage of establishing a team. Okay, that makes sense. And now if we look in our journal, we can see that our journal item is there. So this is yet another way that you could think about. There's our 702.30, and we can see that we've got that. So we can go 702, 702, I think it's W30, right? I'm having some memory here. And we go there and we can see, yes, presence, and it talks about how presence is important for teamwork. And we can see that if we click here, we've got presence. So this is another way that you can do an escape room by having a digital escape room, by having, in this case, Articulate Storyline. You can use lots of different products, but by having the learner need to complete this journal before they come out. And that kind of solves the problem sometimes people have of like, what if people find the exit clue and get it right before they find all the other clues? In this case, that's not the case. You've got to find all these clues first before you can exit the room. And that's a good strategy to use in your learning escape room. And there you have it. There's some ideas on creating your own escape room for learning. Hope you have fun and hope learning happens. So stay active, take action, and remember, action first learning leads to meaningful impacts and outcomes.